Hello, in this video I'm going to give a brief introduction to the human body. So we're going to first start off by talking about biology, because human anatomy and physiology is a subcategory of biology. So what is biology? Biology is the study of life. Right? And when we study human anatomy and physiology, we are studying the form and functions of human life. What does it mean to be alive exactly? Right? What are the characteristics that all living things share? Right? So all living things, including tiny microscopic things like E. coli bacteria, or large things like a maple tree or ourselves, all living things share certain characteristics. So all living things are made of at least one cell. A cell is the smallest package that life comes in, and it contains all of the information that's necessary for life. Now, some organisms exist in a single-celled state their whole entire life, whereas others, such as ourselves, exist in a multicellular state. But all living things are made of at least one cell. All living things metabolize. You've probably heard of the word metabolism before. You probably associate it with energy, right? Well, metabolism is really chemistry, and there's a lot of energy that's being moved around when it comes to chemistry. The metabolism is the sum of all the chemical reactions that are occurring inside of a cell or inside of an organism. So basically, it's all of this chemistry that's happening that helps us to stay alive. All living things grow. Growth can often mean getting bigger, but it can also mean becoming more complex. Living things reproduce, and living things reproduce by passing on a specific form of a molecule, and that is DNA. So in order to reproduce, organisms have to pass on DNA from themselves to their offspring. All living things have to respond to their environment. And there are more characteristics that all living things share, but these are the basics. Now, human anatomy is specifically looking at the science of the structure of the human body and the relationships of its parts, whereas human physiology is looking at the science of the functions of the human body. And the two are related, right? It's really hard to talk about one without talking about the other, right? How can you talk about the heart structure without talking about the functions of the heart? It's very difficult. So they are related. When we look at anatomy and physiology, we can see they have subcategories themselves. For example, if you were studying anatomy in medical school, you could study gross anatomy or microscopic anatomy. Gross anatomy is studying the anatomy of the human body using just your naked eye, whereas microscopic anatomy is obviously using a microscope to study the human body. And physiology also has several subcategories, many subcategories, and I have a couple examples listed here. Like cardiovascular physiology is specifically studying the function of the heart and the blood vessels. Kinesiology is specifically studying the body movements. Right? So I have some pictures here. Right? Up top, hopefully you recognize that as a brain. And down below, those are a little bit less recognizable. Right? So if we were studying that brain, would we be studying gross anatomy or microscopic anatomy? Hopefully you said gross anatomy, right? Those pictures below the brain are actually pieces from the brain, and we're looking at those with the microscope, right? So D and E would be examples of microscopic anatomy. So now I want to talk about the levels of organization in the human body. When we look at the human body, we can see a hierarchy to the organization there. So if we look at the smallest little bits that make up our body, we call those atoms. So atoms are what make up matter of any kind, whether you're a living organism or a non-living thing. Right? So atoms make up rocks, but they also make up people. When groups of atoms get together, it forms what we call a molecule. Right? So an example of a molecule is like a water molecule. A water molecule contains 2 hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom. Okay? So molecules can be simple, like water, but they can be more complex. Like DNA is a molecule, and proteins are molecules. Now, various molecules will get together to form structures inside of a cell called organelles. Right? The word organelle contains the word organ. Right? Organs are large structures in your body that have a specific function. Organelles are like the organs of a cell. So the organelles are the structures that we find in a cell, and they all have a specific function. Organelles include things like mitochondria, which are inside of your cells, and they help you to make ATP. Another example of an organelle is something called the endoplasmic reticulum, which is an organelle that helps you to make protein, amongst other things. So we take these various organelles and we put them together to form a cell. And as I said before, the cell is the smallest package that life comes in. Right? So it contains all of these organelles that are working together to do things like metabolism and to keep the cell alive. Next would be tissues. So tissues are groups of similar cells working together to perform a specific function. Right? For example, we have a bunch of cardiac muscle cells that form our cardiac muscle tissue that we find inside of our heart. Right? So the cardiac muscle tissue is a group of cells working together to perform the function of contraction in order to push your blood through your body. When we take different tissues and put those together, we get organs. So organs by definition are composed of multiple tissue types. Organs also have a specific function and normally a specific location in the human body. So as I mentioned before, cardiac muscle tissue is one of the tissues that we find in the organ called the heart. There are other tissues that make up the heart though too. There's epithelial tissue that lines the inside of the heart. There's connective tissue. So there's more than one tissue type that makes up the heart. But the heart is a distinct organ in the human body, and it does have a specific function. Its function is to push blood through the body. When various organs get together, we have an organ system. So these are also called body systems. So the heart belongs to an organ system called the cardiovascular system, or you could also call it the circulatory system. So the cardiovascular system is made of the heart and the blood vessels. And they work together in order to move blood through the body. When we take all of these organ systems in the human body and put them together, we get the human body itself. Human biology is a science. In anatomy and physiology, we don't have a lot of time to talk about the science behind all of this stuff that we're learning. Right? In human anatomy and physiology, we're really looking at years and years and years of discovery and research that has been done in science. But we don't really look at the discovery process and how they know what they know. We just don't have enough time to do that. But keep in mind that there is science behind all of this. Now, science is a way of knowing. It's a way of knowing things that's based on reliable, objective, testable evidence, right? So what this is saying is that science has a lot of backing to it. It's not just a guess without any proof behind it, okay? But at the same point, science is not 100%, okay? Science by definition has to be flexible, because should we discover something new about the human body that might not fit our current knowledge, we have to be willing to adapt our understanding of the human body in order to take in this new discovery. Right? So science is never 100%, and it's always willing to correct itself if something new and reliable has been discovered. So you're basically going to be learning a new language in this class, right? So human anatomy and physiology has a lot of strange sounding words, and that's because a lot of them have a Latin or a Greek base to them. And I'm assuming most of you don't speak Latin or speak Greek. Sometimes it's very useful to get to know the root words and the prefixes and the suffixes that are used in anatomy and physiology. Because if you know what the roots and prefixes and suffixes mean, you can often ascertain the meaning of a word that's foreign to you. Take, for example, the term homeostasis. You might not know what that word means, but if you break it down into homeo and stasis, you might be able to figure it out. Stasis is a word that we use in the English language, and it means to stay or remain. Homeo is also a prefix that we use in the human language, and it means same. So put that together, homeostasis means staying the same. And that's really what it means. Homeostasis is all about maintaining the same conditions inside the human body despite the variations that are occurring in the internal and external environment. And here's another one, endochondral ossification, right? Crazy sounding word. But if we break it down into its word parts, we can kind of figure it out. Endo means inside, chondro means cartilage, and os means bone. So ossification is bone formation, endochondral is inside cartilage. So endochondral ossification is the formation of bone inside of cartilage. And this is the process that we use to make most of the bones in the human body. So you can see how if you know the word parts, you can kind of come up with what the meaning of the word is. There's lots of synonyms that we use in this class too. Like for example, your hip bone, right? That's not the technical term for your hip bone. The hip bone has lots of other names. Os coxal bone is one. Os coxa for singular. Os coxae, plural. It's also known as the innominate bone, which in Latin means the no-name bone, which is very ridiculous, I know, right? So sometimes this really is a pain in the neck for students because, obviously it would be a lot easier just to learn one term for something, but sometimes there are multiple synonyms. And usually what will happen is I'll let you know when there are multiple synonyms, but I'll tell you which one we use regionally. There's also a lot of homonyms, right? So, for example, take the term nucleus, right? The nucleus can be the center of an atom that contains protons and neutrons. The nucleus can also be the part of a cell that houses the DNA. And the nucleus can also be a group of neuron cell bodies in your brain. So there we're using the same term, nucleus, 3 different ways. Right? Another thing with the language and anatomy and physiology is that many words sound similar. Right? They don't sound exactly the same, but similar. Right? Take, for example, peritoneum versus perineum. Right? Very similar, right? But one has a T and an O in it, and the other one doesn't. But they mean very different things. The peritoneum refers to a membrane that's inside your body cavity, and the perineum is an area on the body near the anus. So definitely not the same things. And we have glucagon and glycogen. These are 2 that students mix up all the time, right? Glucagon is a hormone released by your pancreas. Pretty much does the opposite of insulin. And glycogen is a carbohydrate that stores glucose. Right? They're related, but it's not the same term. So you kind of have to be careful. Make sure when you're reading words in this class, make sure you're reading the correct term. And when you're writing them, make sure you're writing the correct term too.